Hello and welcome to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series, sponsored by the Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation. I'm your host, Ron Duffy. In these interviews, you'll meet successful business leaders and entrepreneurs who talk about what it takes to become a great leader and share their experiences building effective organizations with a Scanlon plan. A Scanlon plan is an innovative leadership process for total organization development. It consists of a set of assumptions about human motivation and behavior, general principles for management based on these assumptions, and specific procedures for implementing these principles. The Scanlon Leadership Network is a nonprofit association of high-performance, values-led organizations founded by Joe Scanlon and Dr. Carl Frost. Joe Scanlon was a steelworker and MIT lecturer who in the 1950s pioneered some of the first high-performance work systems based on the revolutionary idea that the average employee wants to work and has great creativity if given the opportunity. Dr. Frost carried on Scanlon's work at Michigan State University, conducting research and installing Scanlon plans. Member organizations have won the Baldrige Award, the Shingo Prize, hundreds of supplier awards, and 5 have been ranked in the top 50 best places to work in North America. The Scanlon Leadership Network is considered one of the best-kept secrets in American business. The Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation brings this series of interviews to you as a public service to help leaders create better organizations for workers, consumers, and investors. Scanlon, where the best ideas come together. Our guest today is MaxDepree, Chairman Emeritus of Herman Miller Incorporated, the primary innovator in the furniture business for 60 years and regularly included as one of Fortune magazine's 25 most admired companies in the United States. MaxDepree has been mentoring emerging leaders in both the profit and nonprofit sectors for more than 20 years and was elected by Fortune magazine to the National Business Hall of Fame. Depree is the author of several books, including the best-selling books Leadership is an Art and Leadership Jazz. The interview with Max you are about to hear focuses on leadership topics covered in Leadership is an Art. A separate interview with Max as part of the Scanlon Leadership Series focuses on topics covered in Leadership Jazz. And now, let's begin the interview. MaxDepree, I'd like to welcome you to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series.
Thank you.
Max, we're going to be talking to you about one of the books that you've written titled Leadership is an Art. You describe this book as more a book about ideas about leadership than practices. In the introduction, you describe the art of leadership as liberating people to do what is required of them in the most effective and humane way possible. I'd like you to comment on that.
Okay, well, I would say that that's rooted in the idea that everybody is essential as long as they're in their particular role. And, you know, we don't have the opportunity in leadership to bypass the people with whom we work. And so the problem for the leader is to do whatever it takes to enable people to do their very best job. And so I think that liberating people to do what's required of them in an effective and a humane way is something that leaders can actually practice and can do.
I'm curious whether you think if you took stock of leadership today in corporate America, would you say the predominant theme is humane, or is the predominant theme still more on the other side, the inhumane?
I think it's very hard to gauge because a lot of the companies, medium-sized, smaller companies that practice humane leadership are never recognized in the news media. What we hear about in the media is about the rather caustic way of leading in the corporate world, and so it's easy to get the impression that that's all there is. But I think that there are many, many people who are leading in the most proper and most effective ways.
A follow-up quote I'd like you to comment on from your introduction. You say that leadership is more tribal than scientific. I'd ask you to elaborate on that a little bit for our listeners.
Okay. Well, it takes off on the first question you asked. It's true that in the world of corporate leadership, and I think in higher education leadership, for instance, a great deal of time is spent on measurement, how we're going to measure the numbers we're trying to reach. But you don't get numbers by managing numbers. You get the good numbers through the good management or leadership of people. I think it's important to understand that leadership is fundamentally relational, and that's tribal.
I want to pick up on one thing you just said. You don't get good numbers by managing numbers.
No.
I think that's important. Could you say a little more about that?
Well, sure. There's this tendency, particularly among people who are only on the surface of things, often people who write about the corporate world in media, they deal with numbers because they have no opportunity to be at the heart of the organization. And they don't realize how the numbers are actually produced. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we're going to increase our sales volume by 8% this year. The problem is not to add up the numbers to get 8%. The problem is, how do you get the sales department to actually produce 8% more in sales? And that's an entirely different problem than managing numbers.
I'm going to see if I understand what you're talking about. If I'm looking at numbers and I manage by numbers and I'm not getting the number I want, then I react to that and I might implement some strategy. But if I really don't know what's going on in the hearts and minds of the people that are responsible to create the numbers, I might be really missing the boat.
Oh, yeah. You for sure will be missing the boat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Your book, Leadership as an Art, is, correct me if I'm saying something not accurately, Max, but it's basically a series of chapters or a series of essays about leadership. The first one is titled "The Millwright Died." I think it's a poignant and wonderful story. I'd like you to tell that story and its connection to leading effectively.
Okay. Well, first of all, the story takes place in the 1920s. And the millwright at that time was a person who was indispensable in a manufacturing plant because those were in the days before electric motors. So all of the machinery was run by a series of pulleys which were driven by a drive shaft on a steam engine. And the steam engine got its steam from a boiler, and this whole cycle was set up and run every morning by the millwright. Well, when the millwright died, it shut the plant down. But the more important part of the story was that my dad was a young manager at the time, and not being sure what to do, he decided he better go call on the family. And he did. And in the course of the visit, the widow asked if it would be all right if she read some poetry. And he said, of course. And so she went in the other room and came back with a bound book. And for several minutes, she read beautiful poetry. And when she finished, my dad said, well, that's beautiful. Who wrote that? And she said, well, my husband did. And this raised for him this very crucial question, was he a millwright who wrote poetry, or was he a poet who did millwright work? And that's one of the questions that leaders have to deal with all the time, because you can't know people by knowing only a part of them or knowing only a little about what they do. And unless you know who people are in the sense of what else they do as a father or as a volunteer somewhere, you don't really know them. And unless you have an idea of what's in their heart, it's very difficult to be an effective leader.
If I was to take the contrary view, and I'd like to hear how you'd respond to it. So let's say a leader's listening to this and they're going, well, to know that a person is a poet besides a millwright, that's wonderful, but here's the kind of contrary point of view. I don't see how a poet makes any difference whether I'm judging the effectiveness of this millwright in doing his job. How would you respond to that, Max?
I think it's essential that you understand the whole person. I think knowing just a part of what the person is deprives the leader of a very important element in her leadership. There are some things that we do know about people. I think philosophers have taught us that there are certain echoes in the heart of most of us. I think we have a hunger for relationship, and I think most of us delight in beauty. There is in our makeup a quest for spirituality, and I think there's a longing for justice. These are other ways of describing someone who is perhaps a poet, or someone who is a designer, or someone who is an actor on Saturday nights in a local theater. As a leader, you shouldn't think that you're going to be as effective as possible by being uninterested in these things that are in the hearts of the people you work with.
To me, what I'm picking up from your telling me and the listeners that there's more to manage being an effective leader than just knowing the job a person does, but there's real benefit to knowing the whole person in what that person's like in other parts of their life. And it may come to what I'd call unquantifiable information. This is all information that a leader can absorb to use that information about the whole person that might help you make better decisions. Is that part of what you're getting at?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's not only going to help you to make better decisions, but it's going to guide you very much in what your reasonable expectations are of the people you're working with.
All right. Thank you for that comment on the essay, The Millwright Died. A next essay is titled, What is Leadership? And there's a quote in that essay. Actually, there's several quotes that I've written down here. I'm going to start with one, and we may cover a few more, and I'll ask you to respond. Here's the quote. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between the two, the leader must become a servant and a debtor. That sums up the progress of an artful leader. There's quite a bit there, Max, but I'll ask you to tackle it.
Well, to begin with, the signs of outstanding leadership seem to me to always appear primarily among the followers. When you're in the leadership business, one of the things you learn to gauge is the tone of the body. You can measure the effectiveness of leadership by observing what happens among the followers. And when you see it that way, then you realize that there are things that you owe. The quote says that the leader must become a servant and a debtor. Well, if you're a debtor, what is it that one owes? Well, I think, for instance, leaders owe people space. That means space to be who they can be. In other words, whatever your potential is, it's up to the leader to make the opportunity available for you to reach that potential. Because in the workplace, and really in families and in the schoolroom too, space is a sense of freedom. So if leaders are responsible for effectiveness, which they are, then you have a regular progression there. You have to say, this is reality. I'm helping you to define reality. That's one of my jobs as a leader. But now I'm going to serve you. I want to know what you need to deal with that reality. And I'm going to try my best to give you what you need in order that we as a community can deal with that reality. Does that make sense?
Yes. One thing I'm picking up the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. I've been doing a number of the interviews for the Scanlon Leadership Network, and one of the first principles of the Scanlon plan process is the identity principle. And as I've listened to other Scanlon leaders talk about the identity principle, they do say things like, it's defining reality. It's, do you know what day it is in our business? Do you know the realities of your business, your competition? Do you know the job that's expected of you? Do you know why you have to do this job? Do you know how it fits into the bigger picture of how our company's successful? That's all goes into, I think, what you're calling defining reality.
That's right.
And then the second part you're talking about there is, once you've defined reality, a next key part of a leader's job is, how can I help you be successful? Once we've defined reality and you know what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it, how can I help you be successful in doing it?
Yeah, that's right.
There's you touched on effectiveness. There's a wonderful quote in your book that you cite Peter Drucker, and I think, did you say Peter Drucker is one of your mentors?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to read the quote, and if you have any comment on it, please add it. Efficiency is doing the thing right, but effectiveness is doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's right. And you see, and the effectiveness of doing the right thing comes right back to defining reality, because people in the organization need to know what reality is in order to focus on the right thing rather than on the wrong thing.
You could be doing the wrong thing absolutely perfectly, and go out of business pretty quickly.
That's right. Yes.
And I bet you can be doing the right thing, maybe not even perfectly, and if you're doing the right thing, it probably goes a long ways towards keeping you in business.
It does, yes.
You're listening to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series. I'm Ron Duffy, and we are talking with MaxDepree, Chairman Emeritus of Herman Miller Incorporated, the primary innovator in the furniture business for 60 years, and regularly included as one of Fortune magazine's 25 most admired companies in the United States. This interview with MaxDepree focuses on leadership topics covered in his best-selling book, Leadership is an Art. Still on the chapter titled, What is Leadership? You write about the importance for leaders to develop, express, and defend civility and values. And you say, this is a quote now, a leader can tell the difference between living edges and dying ones. A little later on you say, to be at the leading edge of consumption, affluence, and instant gratification is to be on the dying edge. I found that very intriguing. I think our listeners will too. Would you please comment on that?
Yes, that whole idea is rooted in the concept of the common good. One of the problems that we have with people who are at the leading edge of consumption and affluence, etc., is that they're individually or selfishly oriented. What you have is you have selfish behavior, and you have short-term behavior, and you have behavior which is oriented towards me as an individual rather than towards my role in the common good. An example of that we see today, because we're in a society now that honors athletes way beyond reason. And one of the problems we have, particularly with professional athletes, is that they care more about their numbers than they care about how the team is doing. That's a good example of the kind of thing that doesn't fit in with the common good.
I think that's an accurate observation. Professional athletes, the way they're paid is based on how they're measured, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they're measured by certain, to follow this through, I guess I'll just have to pick a sport, so I'll just pick football. So let's take a wide receiver is paid for the number of catches he makes and the amount of yardage he makes and the amount of touchdowns he makes. And to some degree, the measurements aren't totally stupid. They make some sense.
Right. That's right.
But you're getting at the point that if some receiver says, look, quarterback, you're not throwing me the ball enough. Throw me the ball because, I make $4 million a year, and if I don't get my 100 catches a season, they're not going to renew my contract, so throw me the ball. So now the quarterback has pressure to say, well, gee, I got to get the guy the ball. Yeah. And it might be that someone else is open. It might be that they should be running the ball.
Right.
So the point is, if the object is for the group to do well and quote-unquote win the game, the individual trying to get his little piece really goes against that.
That's right.
In business, the danger is, I'm asking, I'll say it and you correct me if I'm wrong, the danger is if we're managing by just certain numbers, somehow that's going to not allow us to achieve what we could achieve?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, for instance, a very current example that travelers are dealing with is that the airlines have, for whatever reason, been pushed in the direction of cutting costs and using their facilities to the maximum. A great example is what has happened to British Airways with the pileup of luggage. They're unable to handle the luggage that their passengers check. I think this is an example of leadership which is focusing on individual aspects of the business and trying to meet certain measurements, but losing sight of what the real definition of reality is, which is whether or not the customer is being served. And it's up to the leader to keep that picture clear for everybody, because not everybody in an organization has the opportunity to see as much of the picture as the leader should be seeing.
Okay, an essay titled Participative Premises. Here's a quote, Max. I'll ask for your comment. Business has been moving for many years and will continue to do so from a posture and a practice of management through power to a process of leadership through persuasion. A little later on you say, I believe the most effective contemporary management process is participative management. A little later on, you continue, it begins with the belief in the potential of people. I know the Scanlon plan process is a participative process. I'd like you to comment on that quote, and if you see any connection to the Scanlon plan, please bring that in.
Well, sure, they're directly related. The Scanlon plan, first of all, I have to say the Scanlon plan is an idea. It's not a formula for what everybody has to do, because the idea takes various forms. The Scanlon plan in manufacturing is different from the Scanlon plan in a research and development department. The Scanlon plan proposes an understandable path to problem ownership and therefore to participation. For instance, one of the things it does is it eliminates the day-to-day whims of individual supervisors, because the Scanlon plan gives you an understandable path that everybody can follow. If you're using that kind of an idea, and if you're moving in the direction of accomplishing your goals by using the skills of everybody, then you no longer need power. What you need is persuasion based on information and based on seeing the large picture. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm going to see if I'm following you. Part of the persuasion, too, in your view of the art of leadership is you get persuasion based on solid information and presenting that, not hoarding it, but presenting it to the concerned people so that you share it and can understand it. And I think you also get persuasion if you go back to your point about the art of leadership is about knowing the whole person.
Yes, that's right.
If I know the whole person, that person understands I see you as a human being.
Yes, that's right.
And I think that's persuasive.
Yes, that's right. Well, yes, Ron, and you also then build that whole idea around the vision and the values of the organization. And you see that combination of things gives you the chance to build remarkable results.
Do you think having a clear vision and articulated values is a common occurrence in business today or not?
Yes, I think it's quite common. I just don't think that the vision and values are always correct.
Maybe, I think that's what I wanted to get at is, do you think leaders have done the type of job that's needed with vision and values? Maybe everybody gives it lip service, and there is some kind of vision, there is some kind of values, but I've often heard comments by people that make you, what do I want to say? The comments are, yeah, they say that's the vision and values, but the behavior sure says another thing.
That's exactly, that's right.
There's work to be done about really understanding vision and values. I guess while we're touching on it, what would you say about helping current leaders or leaders to come who are interested in your views about really getting at the vision and values that can help create tremendous outcomes for a company?
The vision and the values are going to be realized in behavior. Like you said a minute ago, that people could say, well, that's your vision, but I don't see that happening here. The heart of this matter is that your vision and values, and therefore your behavior, have to be rooted in what you believe. Beliefs always precede practice. If we can go back to our athlete picture, it's very clear, for instance, that in America, we believe shortstops are clearly more valuable than chemistry teachers, and that's reflected in our practices.
Is what you're saying that we think a good shortstop on a major league team is worth several $1 million?
Sure. A
good chemistry person in academia or business is worth, not in the millions, but the thousands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the point about that? We think
that's a picture of how our behavior is a reflection of what we believe. You know,
okay.
If we believed chemistry teachers were more important, our practices would be different.
And we may give lip service to saying how important chemistry teachers are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But see, then you're back to where you were a few minutes ago. People in the factory, for instance, can say, well, the leader says so-and-so, but I've been watching his behavior.
Right. So, for example, if you believe in participative management.
Yeah, then you practice it. But on the other hand, if you say, I believe in participative management, but my behavior in my day-to-day work clearly shows that I don't believe in it, then the leader and the organization have a major problem.
If a leader's having that problem, how do they recognize it?
Well, somebody has to give him some feedback ordinarily. One of the most difficult situations for a follower is to try to follow a leader who doesn't know who he is. That's a tough job in life.
It's almost that if somebody knows who they are, even if you don't like it,
yeah.
it's easier to deal with them because you know where they're coming from.
That's right, exactly. Exactly. But if you never know for sure how the leader is going to respond to something because they don't have the confidence and the competence, the follower is in a tough spot.
Do you have any stories or anecdotes about how a follower, got some leader to get on the ship the right way? Or,
well, I think one of my favorite stories was about Carla Ganeshaw, a lift truck driver in the factory, who came to see me one day. She's African American, a very handsome woman, really bright, and she came in my office sat down, made herself comfortable, and began to talk to me about diversity in the plant. She was very clear. She said, I don't think that you know that the diversity program isn't working here. And she said, the problem is you're not telling us what you believe. Well, that was a great favor to me. I have to say that the only reason that could happen is because the kind of organization we were trying to build honored the idea that leadership is a mix of setting a course and of being vulnerable. Carla obviously came to the conclusion that I was vulnerable, or she would not have dared to come in and tell me that.
I want you to keep going with the story because it's very important, but in this sense, vulnerable is a very positive attribute.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in our culture, particularly for men, to be vulnerable is sometimes seen as a weakness.
Yes, that's right.
So an important point you're making about being the art of effective leadership is you certainly have to be competent, and you have to have your followers know that you're vulnerable.
That's right.
Please go on with Carla.
Well, you see, in the beginning, she told me the story about when she and her family were driving south to visit relatives from Michigan, and they were in one of the southern states, and her dad, she said, my dad always wore a white cowboy hat, a 10-gallon hat. They were stopped by a state trooper, and as she said, we knew never unlock the doors or lower the windows. But the trooper rapped on the window and told her dad, take that hat off as long as you're in this county. So she said her dad did, and they drove on, and he didn't put his hat back on until they got into the next county. And she made up her mind then and there that she was always going to speak up about this form of unfairness and insolence and really very inappropriate treatment of one human being by another. And that she told me that's what triggered her to come in. She had to speak up because of what she had seen as a girl.
She did speak up to you. You were able to listen.
Yes.
and be vulnerable. In your book, you talk about that you did address the situation. Do you have any words for our listeners about how do you cultivate the art of being vulnerable?
If you are vulnerable, you have to demonstrate it to people in the way in which you interact with them. To me, there are two factors about that. One key element is that a leader ought to spend more time dealing with the right questions rather than giving answers. And the other thing is a leader has to cultivate the skill of listening when people have something to say. And you have to respond. I mean, if you ask somebody a question and they give you an answer and nothing happens, you won't get another answer. Something has to happen.
Listening, I think, is an underappreciated skill.
Oh, my, yes.
I'm reminded of I don't know if this relates to what you're talking about, but I had a moment in my own life. I'll try to tell this very briefly. As a young man, I worked at the state legislature in Minnesota, and I was assigned the issue of gun control. I was the researcher who tried to come up with all the facts and figures and reasons why there should be control of handguns.
Yes.
A woman legislator, called me up and said, would you come to my office? So I came to her office, and she said the vote was so close that one vote difference would either defeat the bill or make it work. Now, I'm talking 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. Things have changed, and the politics have changed. But back then, it was that close. And she said, I wanted to support this bill, but I am getting some threatening and ugly phone calls from people, and they're threatening my family. And what was going on in my mind was going, oh, my God, she's going to change her vote, and the bill's won't become law, and I'll be blamed. I, almost out of incompetence, did some deep listening. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I think all I said was, as I listened to her story. And what I discovered later, she ultimately voted for the bill. It did pass by one vote. Mm-hmm. And she needed to vent. And she needed to share her frustration and her anger at the inappropriate comments and treatment that were being generated towards her for her position. But I didn't say anything other than I truly was very attentively hearing every word she said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that was an example of the power of listening.
Yes. Well, and from her side, she could tell that you were listening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can all do that.
So as a leader, I almost get the impression, like you're saying, do you know the right questions to be asking? As a listener, you don't have to have the answer. I actually think if you're in the listening mode, if you think you have the answer, you're not really listening.
No, that's right. That's right.
And your point is this is to develop and cultivate the art and skill of deep listening is a very important skill for effective leadership.
Yes, yes. And the other point I was trying to make is don't just express your participation by giving the answer, but use questions to get the best answer and to enable other people to have a share in developing the best answers.
There are some further quotes that I think relate to this in your chapter, Participative Premises. Quote, "Everyone has the right and the duty to influence decision-making and to understand the results. Participative management guarantees that decisions will not be arbitrary, secret, or closed to questioning. Participative management is not democratic. Having a say differs from having a vote." I really liked those words, and I think it fits with the conversation here. And as I read those, I have been thinking that that's the heart and that's the part and parcel of the Scanlon plan.
Oh, yes, yes.
You're listening to the Scanlon Leadership Interview Series. I'm Ron Duffy, and we are talking with MaxDepree, Chairman Emeritus of Herman Miller Incorporated, the primary innovator in the furniture business for 60 years, and regularly included as one of Fortune magazine's 25 most admired companies in the United States. This interview with MaxDepree focuses on leadership topics covered in his best-selling book, Leadership is an Art. Okay, another chapter, another essay titled Theory Fastball, and here's a quote. "In almost every group, nearly everybody at different times and in different ways plays two roles. One is creator, and the other is implementer. This key relationship is often underestimated and mistakenly cast in the light of boss and subordinate. Hierarchy is inappropriate here. Oftentimes, implementing has to be as creative as the creative act to which it is responding." Do you have any comment to your writing there, Max?
Well, I think one of the best examples of that, in my experience, Ron, is the relationship between two people at Herman Miller. One is Bill Stumpf, who was a very creative designer of office furniture, chairs and desks and so on. And the other person is a man named Pep Nagelkirk, who was one of these unusually gifted model makers. He, of course, could follow any drawings and make the model or make the sample that the designer wanted. But he also saw himself as being an equal partner in this arrangement, and Bill Stumpf accepted that idea. He understood, too, that Pep Nalgekirk was an equal partner. And so they have a long history at Herman Miller of having produced outstanding products because one was the creator and one was the implementer, and they were prepared to accept each other in those roles. There was no jealousy. And I think this is a beautiful picture of what I was talking about earlier, of what really is the common good. And it happens when people surrender themselves to the common good.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move us on so we can give listeners a touch of a lot of different parts of your book, The Art of Leadership. This next essay is titled Intimacy. And you started off with this great little story about a restaurant owner. Do you want to tell that?
Yeah. A young man I know went to a local restaurant. He, of course, only had about an hour for lunch, had to be back at work. The restaurant was very busy, and he did finally get a menu, but he never had a chance to place his order. And so he got up and left, but on the way out, he, in a gentle way, told the cashier what had happened. That evening, when he and his wife were getting ready for dinner, the owner of the restaurant showed up at his house and had 2 dinners to deliver for that evening and the next night, because he appreciated so much that the man gave him the feedback. But also the owner understood if he's going to run the restaurant properly, he has to be focused entirely on the customer. And that intimacy with understanding who he was and what his business was is what led him to make that really wonderful gesture.
I bet he earned a customer for life.
I imagine, yes.
The lesson for leadership about intimacy in this story, one of the lessons is even when something was going wrong, there was an opportunity on both ends. There was an opportunity on the person who in this case was in the customer role, or it could be somebody in a subordinate or follower role who took a risk and interacted with the business.
Yes.
And said, I want you to know this didn't work out for me. And then the owner's response about just everything that went into giving this guy an extra lunch and bringing it to his home creates a bond that will allow you to get through the next tough time.
Well, yes, that's right. And the longer-term result of that is that the young man and his wife who got the free meals are going to tell all their friends, that they know a restaurant owner who's intimate with his business.
Any other thoughts on intimacy and how to be an effective leader and build intimacy into that?
Yes, because intimacy has its counterpoints, has its enemies. I think intimacy is betrayed by politics and by short-term thinking and by arrogance. I think that intimacy is betrayed by people who pay attention to what's superficial rather than to the heart of a matter. So intimacy, like so many other great qualities, does have its enemies.
This is a quote from your chapter on intimacy. Managers who have no beliefs but only understand methodology and quantifications are modern-day eunuchs.
Yes, I think, well, in a way, that's a summary of a number of the things that we've been talking about on this discussion together. There are many people who wish to be in leadership positions who don't want to go deeply into what their opportunities and responsibilities are. It is much easier to run a business dealing just with methodology and quantifying everything, but they're missing the best part of life by doing that. And I believe that one of the reasons America has this marvelous construct of volunteer organizations is, well, first of all, because people have a vision for how things should be. But secondly, I think a lot of people are so frustrated and unfulfilled in their daily work that they seek opportunities in these lively nonprofit organizations to express their own potential and to get the fulfillment that they think life holds for them.
And is the challenge of an effective leader, an artful leader, to find ways to bring that kind of energy, to allow that kind of energy to surface in the workplace?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. As a leader, you do that by asking yourselves some questions. I think, for instance, young leaders seeking to develop their capabilities ought to try to answer the question, who do I intend to be? Not what do I intend to do, but who do I intend to be? I think that young people have to ask themselves, who gives me health? Because if I can figure out who gives me health, then I probably have a mentor who can help me. And then, of course, later on, you turn that question around and you ask, am I a person who gives others health? These are the kinds of questions that I think younger leaders ought to deal with.
By health, you mean who inspires me, who gives me confidence, who allows me to feel I can be the best I can be?
Yes.
There's a theme throughout your book, The Art of Leadership, that talks about, well, here's a quote from an essay titled Wither Capitalism. We must understand that reaching our potential is more important than reaching our goals. I'm hearing you talk about trying to get access to that potential.
Yes, yes. That's always underlying the leader's approach to life, because potential is such a mysterious thing. You know, we have learned about that in working with the handicapped, and we have learned about that in working with people from minority groups. We know that we cannot look at a person and decide who they are or what they can do. You have to know somebody very, very well before you have insight into who they can be in the organization. Knowing who gives me health and whether or not I give health to people is a part of all of that.
Well, thank you, Max. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us on to another essay, and this one is titled Giant Tales. And your quote that I'd like you to focus on here is Giants see opportunity where others see trouble. Are you saying that leaders need to see opportunities where others see trouble, or you need to recognize people in the organization that have that gift?
Yes, both, yes. The leader has to have a frame of mind which says that problems or trouble are not trouble, they're opportunity. That's one of the differences between a leader and someone who doesn't have that capability. It's a frame of mind that is really crucial to good leadership. There are really many stories about that in life. We all have that. We all have had experiences where either we capitalized on that understanding or we missed something really important by not recognizing that a problem really is an opportunity in disguise.
There are two stories in your book. One is the story of your dad and Jim Eppinger.
Yeah.
And the second one, I'm going to say both of them and ask you to say one or the other or both. The second story is the story of George Nelson, a designer, and the giant tale is about his advocacy for what many people would see to be a competitive designer, Charles Ames, to have his designs included in Herman Miller's furniture. Could you share that with us?
Yes. George Nelson was the Herman Miller designer starting in the mid-1940s after the end of World War II. And he was an excellent furniture designer. But he came to my father one day. My father was still the CEO, and he said, "There's a young designer who is doing some really outstanding work, and there's a show of his work at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and you should see that, and we should consider adding him to the program." And my dad said, "Well, George, we're a small company. We can hardly do the fair thing by you with your designs because these men were working for for royalties. They didn't get a salary. They got a royalty on what was sold. And George Nelson's response was, well, Charles Eames does things I will never be able to do, and the company needs us both. So he thought, I think, is a beautiful picture of someone who put the common good ahead of his personal well-being.
I agree, and he was a giant who saw an opportunity where others see trouble. One designer might say, we're going to be trying to sell my designs, and you bring a competitor in, that's going to cut out on my chance to make money in royalties. That's somebody who sees trouble.
That's right.
The someone who sees opportunity says, if you add this person's designs with mine, we're so different, but together it's such a unique thing, it's going to build the whole company and we're all going to benefit.
That's right.
That's the common good. It's taking risk in a positive sense, and the results can be astounding.
Yes, and they were.
And the similar story about Jim Eppinger, I'll set the scene for you. I think it's early in the business of the furniture company, and things weren't so good. Jim was the sales manager, and your dad was at his house for Christmas?
Yes.
And why don't you take it from there? What was your dad feeling bad about?
Well, he was feeling bad because he saw under the Christmas tree there were no gifts for the family. And he knew that the company owed Jim back salary, which he hadn't been able to pay. And so he left feeling really guilty about that. Although he did promote Jim at the time. Jim, I think, was in Philadelphia at the time, and my dad gave Jim the New York territory, which was the prized territory. And many years later, when the two of them were having a late-in-life conversation, my dad was still stricken by that, and he reminded Jim of that story and how badly he felt that he wasn't able to meet his payroll at the time, and how Jim's children had no Christmas. And Jim said to him, well, that wasn't the problem at all. He said, you gave me the New York territory at that time, and that's the greatest opportunity I ever had. I think that's a picture of two giants.
Absolutely. Someone seeing opportunity where someone else might see trouble or a dead end.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Max, for sharing about those stories in the chapter Giant Tales. I'm going to move us on. I'm going to switch back and forth. There's an essay titled, Who Owns This Place? And when we're done with that, I'm going to move you back to a chapter titled Tribal Storytelling. But I do want to do this Who Owns This Place next. In that essay, there's a quote that you say. I'm going to say it in a minute. I was really affected and grieved by the story you wrote about. Grieved because of, this is just my personal opinion now, grieved because of how widespread and common the life-threatening consciousness displayed by the CEO in the story that we'll share in a minute. I wonder, will we ever survive this mentality? That's something I wanted to ask you. My view is this mentality has the potential to destroy the planet, and I'll ask you to comment after I read this section from your book. This is what you wrote. One perception of ownership appeared in a recent business magazine when the president of a privately owned company was asked if his tactics would be different if he were running a public company. His response was, if I knew my compensation next year would be based on this year's return on equity, hell no, I wouldn't act the same. You've only got a few years at the top in a public company to make your killing. You want to put every penny on the bottom line to wind up with the juiciest retirement package you can get. I'd like to seek your insight and comment on what you wrote there.
Well, this is a picture that we do see enacted day by day. This past week in the Wall Street Journal, there was a front-page story about an investment banker who had decided to leave his company because he was unable to make more than $70 million a year. He was saying $70 million a year is not enough for me. Now you have to think about that in the context of who we are as a society. We already have seen serious demise of our middle class in America, and more we have an upper class, a very elitist upper class, who are making money every year in amounts that most of the population cannot even fathom. And we seem to be having a growing group in the lowest segment, although we don't have as much poverty as we used to have, but our lower segment is not growing the way the upper segment is. And as the middle class seems to be getting smaller and smaller, what I believe we have going on is the development of a class society which is against the whole history of America. And I think that what we're seeing here are the consequences of a lack of personal restraint. So to me, this is a very serious situation in America today.
Does the role of leaders in our organization and corporations have a role in changing that course?
I think a lot of the business leaders are a part of the guilty group. And if they wanted to change it, they could change it. You see, there are other things about capitalism. On the one hand, has had a great history, I think, and has a great future, but it is far from perfect. And I think another way to look at that is that when you think about all of the trash that's on television, and then you understand who pays for it. It's paid for by the corporations. And there obviously is no sense of a moral obligation concerning the kind of entertainment that's produced for our homes.
There's still a disconnection there in admitting that I'm part of what's happening.
That's right. That's right.
If we have leaders listening who agree with what you've been saying and what this conversation is about, and they're asking, what can I do? How would you respond to them?
In the quality of their lives, they should be more responsible on behalf of other people. To use the television trash thing, corporations are paying the bill for the production of that kind of program through their advertising dollars. They can complain about it, or they can stop it, or they can ignore it. In terms of the kind of demands they make on society for their own benefit, I think leaders can make the choice to live with more personal restraint in terms of what they take out of the whole package that all of us share in this country.
Well, thank you, Max. I'm going to move us on. The essay titled Tribal Storytelling. There's a wonderful story at the beginning I'd have you share if you could, and then here's the quote that I'd have you elaborate on. Every corporation, every institution needs tribal storytellers.
Okay. Well, the story is about our good friend Carl Frost, who is the one who introduced the Scanlon Plan to the Midwest back in the late 40s, early 50s. He and his family worked in Nigeria for a time. He was a professor at Michigan State University, and he and his family moved to Nigeria, and where he was a teacher at the university. And he told the story about the people living in their huts, and one day the electricity arrived in the village, so everybody could have a single light bulb inside their hut. What happened is that they stopped gathering outdoors every night around a campfire to listen to the elders give them the history of the tribe, and they sat inside their huts by themselves, enamored of the single electric light bulb they had, and the tribe began to lose its history because they weren't sitting around talking about who they were. And this can happen in organizations too, in corporations and in universities and in churches, and in the American Red Cross, wherever. What happens with tribal storytelling is that we pass on our vision, we tell each other about our values, we talk about the art of the job, we talk about our rights in this organization, And tribal storytelling has some really crucial functions. It preserves the history of the organization. It's one of the key avenues for corporate renewal, and it's where you build your culture for change. So tribal storytelling is something that I think every corporation, every institution needs.
Your story of Carla, who took on the task of taking a risk and approaching you, the CEO, and saying that the behavior of how we do diversity around here isn't matching the words that the company is speaking, and you need to know this. I would see that story, if told to other people in the organization, becomes part of the tribal history of the company. I would think that would give someone else on the third shift courage to speak up. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, yes. And that's why I included the essay on tribal storytelling in the book, because I think it's so important that people who seek to be leaders understand the role of tribal storytellers in every organization.
How can leaders encourage tribal storytelling, or is it a matter of get out of the way?
Yes, partly it's a matter of getting out of the way, but I think it begins with vulnerability, which enables people to begin to express their ideas about this. You know, at some point in one of these tapes, we may also talk about Nancy Honor, who in a meeting in which I was participating, accused me of not believing in adoption. And after I denied it a couple of times, she said, no, she said, you don't believe in it, because if you believed in it, the company would pay the cost for adoption just like they pay the cost for having a natural-born baby. She could express this very important idea because she believed it was okay. And I can tell you, it only took us a couple weeks to change the policy.
That's part of tribal storytelling because it's proof. It's a story that change for positive can happen if the courage to bring up the quote-unquote dangerous topic to a person in power can take place.
Yeah. Yes, that plus you see people in organizations spend a lot of time talking to each other about what's going on, and they have to know the stories from the history of the company so they can tell new people about this history, so new people will understand what kinds of behavior are appropriate.
You've been listening to one of the Scanlon Leadership Network interview series. I'd like to thank our guest, MaxDepree, for being with us. This interview series about leadership and Scanlon business principles is brought to you by the Scanlon Leadership Network and Foundation, a nonprofit association of high-performance, values-led organizations. Scanlon, where the best ideas come together. For information on the services offered by the Scanlon Leadership Network, visit their website at www.scanlonleader.org. That's on the web at scanlonleader.org. Scanlon is spelled S-C-A-N-L-O-N. Or call 517-332-8927. That's 517-332-8927. That's our interview for today. The great Scanlon leader, D.J. Depree, taught us that every meeting with another human being should be what he called a fortuitous encounter. We are all children of God. We all have competencies and talents. The fact that we came together should make a difference. Here's wishing that all your encounters are indeed fortuitous. I'm Ron Duffy, and on behalf of the Scanlon Leadership Network, thanks for listening.